Something big happened. The back windows of several cars were smashed. First, it was an Audi, then a Ford, then another Audi, then a Volkswagen. And here's another one, another Audi. Inside the cars, there were flyers stuffed everywhere. The flyers said, September 3rd, the anniversary of China's victory in the war of resistance against Japan and World Anti-Fascist War. I've already reported it to the police. There's even a Mercedes here. This is serious. I've reported it. Something big is happening. Over here, there are two more. One Volkswagen, one Audi.
Out of more than 30 cars, 8 foreign-brand sedans had their rear windows smashed, and political flyers were forcibly placed inside. Chinese media barely covered this incident, with only a brief mention by the paper. The local police station stated it was an individual act, and the suspect had been arrested. Affected car owners were advised to go to the station to file a police report. The vlogger in the video shouted twice, "Something big is happening in the country," clearly suggesting to the audience that this was not just an ordinary crime. Many people in the comments expressed concerns, saying that in China today, anything related to the West could be targeted and destroyed at any time. Just 2 days earlier, in a shopping mall parking lot, more than a dozen Mercedes-Benz cars were smashed overnight. Last October, another vlogger's Tesla was vandalized after being parked on the street overnight.
My car was smashed. It's 6:09 in the morning. I parked it on the roadside last night because I got home late. I planned to move it early this morning, but when I came back, I found my car had been wrecked. Let me show you. My license plate was bent out of shape. They used a shared bike to smash all my windows.
This hostility towards foreign brands isn't just about cars. Many Chinese people have started rejecting all foreign brands that perform well in the Chinese market. Last March, when Apple opened its flagship store in Shanghai, Tim Cook was there for the launch. Outside, an elderly woman criticized people lining up to buy Apple products, saying, "You're drinking the blood of our martyrs while acting like traitors." Why is Apple allowed to open a store in such a prime location in Shanghai? Why are so many people buying their products? The woman snapped back, "It's because of people like you that the store exists." Another person argued, "Do you know how many jobs Apple creates in China every year?" But she insisted, "We don't need them. We have our own Huawei." In street interviews, car owners driving foreign brand vehicles were confronted and accused of being unpatriotic. Even if they explained that they also owned domestic cars, they were still repeatedly questioned. "Sir, why are you driving a foreign brand car?"
No, I have a Chinese car at home.
"Shouldn't Chinese people support domestic brands? Are you refusing to support our local auto industry?"
I do support it. I have a Chinese car. I just didn't drive it today.
"But right now you're driving a foreign car. Can you explain why?"
I'm just driving my own car. What's there to explain?
"Please be honest. Don't lie to the camera."
You can call my home and ask. I really do own a domestic car. I just don't drive it today.
So you acknowledge domestic brands, but you still choose an imported car. Could this be seen as a preference for foreign things over our own?
I have a Chinese car, and that doesn't mean I have to drive it every day.
Sir, I think you misunderstood my question. Owning a Chinese car only proves that you bought one, but it doesn't prove that you use it. So if you bought a Chinese car but still choose to drive a foreign one, isn't that a form of hypocrisy? This growing anti-foreign sentiment is even stronger online. People who use Apple products or drive Teslas are often labeled as traitors, accused of not loving their country.
You always say how great the West is, how great Apple is, how great Western medicine is. If you're not a traitor, then what are you? You're even worse than a traitor. Apple has sold hundreds of millions of phones in China, so everyone using an iPhone is a traitor? Exactly. I think using an iPhone makes you a traitor. Tesla sells hundreds of thousands of cars here every year. Even a dog wouldn't drive a Tesla.
In real life, even saying something positive about the US or Western countries can immediately get someone labeled as a pro-West sympathizer or worse. As nationalism grows, foreign companies are facing increasing challenges in China.
German luxury car brands are struggling. Among them, Mercedes-Benz is doing the best. It's still the industry leader, and even though its sales are dropping, they're falling at a slower rate. In the first 3 quarters, Mercedes-Benz pre-tax profits plunged 32% compared to last year. If we only look at the third quarter, its net profit fell by 54%. BMW is in second place, with its third quarter net profits dropping by 83.8% year over year. But Audi is in the worst shape. Its operating profit fell by around 55% in the first 3 quarters, and in the third quarter alone, it plummeted 91%.
As public hostility grows, foreign companies in China are facing more than just tough market competition. They also have to deal with rising resentment from the public and increasing pressure from government policies. As a result, many of them have chosen to leave. Last May, Microsoft pulled out. In August, IBM laid off staff. In September, Cisco announced its exit from China. Even Apple has shifted production to Vietnam and India. Companies are either leaving or selling off their businesses. In the auto industry, Honda shut down 2 factories last July, and in June, Dongfeng Nissan closed its Changzhou plant. Retailers are also struggling. Carrefour barely has any stores left in China. Walmart is shutting down locations one after another, and the South Korean retailer Lot has completely withdrawn its headquarters from China. But even after these companies leave, public opinion doesn't let go. Online discussions continue to criticize them.
This just proves that we're getting stronger. Our domestic companies are taking over market share, forcing foreign brands out. They have no choice but to leave and cut jobs. Our industries are on the rise. In the future, we'll be the only ones calling the shots in the global market.
As China strengthens its ties with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, anti-Western sentiment within the country is becoming more intense. In August 2023, there was a nationwide boycott of Japanese seafood. In January 2024, a Japanese mother and son were stabbed in Suzhou. And now we're seeing acts of vandalism targeting foreign brand cars. The hostility has expanded. It's no longer just against Japanese brands. Now anything foreign is at risk. But is this growing anti-Western sentiment truly spontaneous? If it were, the issue might not be so complex. The reality is that the Chinese Communist Party is deliberately fueling it. There's historical basis for China's distrust of the West. The Opium Wars and the division of Chinese territory among Western powers were painful chapters in history. But during the nationalist government's rule, these events were not overly emphasized. It was only after the CCP came to power that they turned these past humiliations into political tools. Through nationalist and historical education, the government has woven these narratives into its official rhetoric, constantly reinforcing a sense of victimhood among the public. Mr. Ma Zhao, a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, has analyzed this trend, pointing out that China's anti-Western sentiment is largely the result of decades of government-driven patriotic education. For years, the government has repeatedly revisited China's century of humiliation and blamed Western powers. Every time there's a major diplomatic conflict, anti-Western emotions flare up again. The 1999 U.S. bombing of the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia and the 2001 mid-air collision between a U.S. spy plane and a Chinese fighter jet both triggered nationwide outrage. The CCP strategically links such events to themes of Western imperialism and China's history of suffering, using them as catalysts for nationalism. Decades of this kind of propaganda inevitably shape public opinion. Under President Xi Jinping, this hostility has only intensified. Since the U.S.-China trade war began in 2018, China's wolf warrior diplomacy and state media narratives have further deepened the divide between China and the West. Whenever Western countries take any action, the CCP presents it as an attempt to suppress China's rise. Western media coverage is dismissed as biased or hostile, further amplifying public resentment. Xi has also heavily promoted the idea of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and its self-reliance. The message is clear. China has overcome Western oppression, and now it's time for payback. This mindset of struggle and revenge plays perfectly into the CCP's hands, stirring up national pride while directing public anger towards external enemies. The CCP also uses this rhetoric to justify cracking down on domestic unrest. Whenever protests break out, the government quickly blames foreign forces for stirring up trouble. When Chinese citizens gathered in late 2022 to mourn the victims of the Urumqi fire and called for an end to COVID lockdowns, the CCP immediately dismissed it as a color revolution orchestrated by the West. So this rising wave of anti-Western sentiment isn't entirely organic. It's a carefully crafted narrative pushed by the government. A perfect example of the strategy is the 2021 film Battle at Lake Changjin, which broke box office records. It portrayed China's involvement in the Korean War as a heroic fight against Western imperialism, reinforcing the narrative of China-US confrontation. Movies like this serve as powerful propaganda tools, legitimizing the CCP's rule by fostering a deep-seated antagonism towards the West. At this point, being anti-American and anti-Western has become mainstream in China. In today's tense geopolitical climate, the CCP is using nationalism as a core strategy to maintain its grip on power. Just take a look at how people are talking about it online.
What exactly are we opposing when it comes to the United States? There are two main things. First, we strongly oppose U.S. interference in our international affairs. We reject their attempts to dictate how we handle our own issues. Second, we are firmly against the so-called universal values that the U.S. promotes, their flawed ideologies, political models, and ways of doing things. Why do we oppose these? Simply put, because they are highly dangerous. They can easily mislead ordinary people and create instability in our society.
However, even in the midst of overwhelming anti-Western propaganda and rising nationalism, rational voices still exist in Chinese society. Despite heavy censorship, some rare and thoughtful perspectives manage to surface on the Chinese internet. One viral video on Douyin presented a surprising viewpoint.
Should we also feel some gratitude toward the West? In modern history, we were repeatedly defeated by Western powers, and that created deep national resentment. But within that resentment, there's also humiliation and insecurity. As a nation that has prided itself on being the center of civilization for 5,000 years, the gap between our self-image and reality has been hard to accept. But can we step away from this sense of humiliation and look at history from another perspective?
The speaker pointed out that since the Ming and Qing dynasties, China's contributions to global civilization have been minimal, whereas Western contributions to China have been extensive. During the Age of Exploration, China introduced crops like sweet potatoes, and corn from the West. Drought-resistant, high-yield crops that helped the population grow from 100 million in the late Ming dynasty to 400 million in the mid to late Qing dynasty. In the 1970s, China also adopted Western fertilizers and pesticides, which led to a massive increase in food production and a population boom past 1 billion. Without these Western-introduced agricultural advancements, China would have struggled to sustain such a large population. In terms of governance, the British pioneered constitutionalism and the rule of law, which limited monarchs' power and protected civil rights. Without learning from the West and reforming, China still might be closed off from the world, with people kneeling before officials and worshipping emperors, trapped in an unequal authoritarian system. Since the Industrial Revolution, China has imported Western science, technology, industry, commerce, art, architecture, and more. Ordinary people now have access to electricity, telephones, air conditioning, refrigerators, televisions, cars, and the internet. They live in high-rise buildings and travel on high-speed trains and airplanes. Almost none of these life-changing inventions came from China. Instead, China has reaped the benefits of centuries of Western civilization, allowing it to make rapid advancements. As this commentator put it, if China had remained isolated from the world, its fate might have resembled that of Native American tribes. If it had refused to engage with the West, it could have ended up like North Korea. This kind of clear-headed perspective is rare in today's China, where nationalism is at an all-time high. He also criticized a popular mindset in China, the idea of learning from the West only to one day defeat it. Many believe China should adopt Western knowledge and technology now, then turn against the West once it becomes strong enough. But he argued that this attitude is not only ungrateful but also unrealistic. The West is not foolish. It will eventually see through these intentions and shut its doors to cooperation. Despite this, China is moving down an increasingly contradictory path. It seeks to learn Western science and management, relies on Western capital and markets, yet simultaneously harbors deep hostility toward the West and aligns itself with anti-Western countries. The dangers of this contradiction are starting to show. In September 2023, China tested a DF-31 intercontinental ballistic missile with a range of 12,000 kilometers, launching it from Hainan into the Pacific. Almost immediately, Chinese military analysts began flooding the internet with aggressive rhetoric, declaring that war between China and the US was inevitable.
Given the missile's range and launch location, this was far more of a warning than a simple test. The Chinese government wouldn't reveal this capability unless it felt seriously pressured. This clearly signals China's stance, the official start of resistance against Western hegemonic powers.
Some commentators have gone as far as saying that this confrontation will first erupt in the Middle East. They argue that only by breaking America's financial aid and military dominance can China truly shake U.S. global leadership. These inflammatory statements are being widely circulated, suggesting that the government may be preparing public opinion for potential military conflict. In this increasingly tense environment, foreign businesses and expatriates still in China face more than just economic challenges. They're also at risk of being caught in escalating political tensions. They must remain cautious and prepare for potential upheaval.